Today, discover how you can cut your costs this month by evaluating your waste. Learn how overportioning, spillage, theft, and spoilage all can contribute to not making the profit you should this month, and master the skills required to prevent waste.
Hello and welcome to the Bar Business Podcast, where we help bar owners increase profits, attract loyal guests, and simplify operations so you can avoid burnout and finally enjoy your life outside of your bar. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, the Bar Business Coach.
So today we're diving into an issue that I think everyone faces, particularly in December. December, if you really think about it, this is one of our busier months of the year for most folks. And because we're so busy, something like waste compounds. Now, when I say compounds, I don't mean that on a percentage basis, you're going to waste more in December than you do other months. You may or may not. But if you normally sell $25,000 worth of food, and in December you sell $55,000 worth of food, intrinsically within that gap, right? You're jumping $30,000 there. That's over 100% increase. There's going to be a lot more waste. So regardless if you're doing well with your waste or not, just the fact that you're busier means more waste. And so what we want to do is we want to find ways that we can cut down on that. That's going to ensure that we have a profitable December, and that's going to set us up for success come January, February when we're getting into the slower months. Now, one thing that's true of many bar owners, and I just want to hit on this before we dive into how to avoid this waste, is we don't think about waste a lot. We think about our top line. We don't think about our costs. And we don't think about our food costs drifting up or down a point or two based upon what's going on. And that's really what we're talking about here. You know, if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know I like to talk about little changes that add into a big difference. And this is one of those. This is why we want to be very careful with waste when we're in our busiest period of the year. So there are 4 categories of waste we want to track and pay attention to. The first one is overportioning. So whether that's pouring a little heavy in your cocktails or putting too many fries on a plate, overportioning for most folks is going to be about a 2 to 5% increase in ingredients over what you should be using. Now, again, not normally a huge thing, right? I mean, it's one of those things that we kind of accept in a lot of ways, is that there is some overportioning going on. There is some overpouring going on. Sometimes people eyeball things wrong. But the higher volume we have, the more important it is to try to get that tighter and tighter so that we waste less and less. Otherwise, we're just wasting more of our cash down the drain. The second category of waste we want to look at is spillage and breakage. And this is particularly true during those busy holiday nights, whether we're talking about dropping plates of food, dropping cocktails, bumping into people, losing trays, all that stuff happens. And when we spill a tray, when we drop plates, when we have a bunch of breakage, that is going to lead to an amount of quantifiable waste. And quite frankly, like I said, when we're busier, this tends to get worse. So we want to make sure we're watching our spillage and our breakage, and we're doing what we can to minimize it. The next type of waste we want to look at is shrinkage and theft. Now, I know we would all like to hope that no one on our team is stealing from us. None of our customers are stealing from us. None of our vendors are stealing from us. And hopefully that is true. But having been in this industry for, most of my adult life, plus when I was a kid, I'm not going to trust that. I'm going to think, okay, if there is theft and there is shrinkage, that's going to happen. And a lot of folks, quite frankly, when they see a lot of something, are more likely to try to get a 5-finger discount just because they figure, well, you'd notice 1 bottle of vodka in 10, but you may not notice 1 bottle of vodka in 36. So keep in mind, as we have more inventory on hand, as we're busier, sometimes that happens more. The final type of waste we want to look out for is food spoilage. Now, the good part about food spoilage is when we're really busy, we tend to move through food really quick. Now, on the flip side of that, the real danger during this holiday season is that you overorder for a party that's going to happen next week, and then that party cancels. And so now you're going to waste food because it's just there. Now, when we're talking about food spoilage, this really isn't something that should be happening as far as the food should never actually spoil. If you have food that's going bad, work with a food pantry, a soup kitchen, anything like that in your area where you can donate that food and move it along to someone else who's going to use it, who's going to eat it, who's going to enjoy it. And you can help your community at the same time. That's a way better option than leaving food just to rot in your walk-in. Now, that being said, we do want to make sure that we're not over-ordering a huge excessive amount and creating that food spoilage or that those food donations where we don't need them, because that's going to not help our December numbers. So now that we have those 4 ideas or those 4 types of waste we want to look at, let's talk about how do we audit this. So here's a 48-hour audit protocol. And this does not take very long to do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at our poor cost variance. Now, the thing about poor cost variance is I'm sure all of you realize that means you have to take an inventory before and after. A 48-hour period is going to give you a good indication if you pick the right days, right? So like if you do inventory Friday morning and then you do inventory Sunday morning, you kind of understand Friday, Saturday. If you do inventory Monday morning and then do inventory again Wednesday morning, well, Monday, Tuesday are so slow, I don't know that you're going to get any benefit out of this. But on a Friday, Saturday, take inventory Friday morning, take inventory Sunday morning. That's going to give you your actual usage of alcohol, and then compare that with your P-mix, see what your actual versus theoretical is. As we've discussed before, we generally want that within a couple percentage points, right? There should not be too much variance between actual and theoretical, but there will always be some. That is just the nature of life. But do what you can to measure that. Then we want to do a ounce test pour with all our bartenders if you're free pouring. If you're using jiggers, just make sure they know how to use a jigger, make sure they're using the right jiggers, make sure they know the recipes. But if you're free pouring, it's really important as we're getting in the holidays, as we're getting in this higher volume couple weeks here, have all your employees pour, make them test, make sure they know what an ounce is, what an ounce and a quarter is, make sure they know also what your standard drink sizes are, right? Make sure they know their recipes. But the whole purpose of a pour test is to ensure that your bartenders have the ability to pour properly and not waste your product. One thing you can do is if you're super worried about waste and theft and things of that nature, and this is something I normally don't recommend to people, but it is always good to keep in mind, is to actually do an inventory before the shift and at the very end of the shift and focus on like 5 or 10 high cost, high volume items. And that's going to give you a really quick snapshot of your usage. You can use your P-mix to determine, hey, a lot of times for most bars, if we pick 5 different alcohols to do this with, that's going to represent at least 30, if not 50% of their sales. So it's easy, it's quick, you can do it. Now, again, this is not something I would necessarily say to always do, to do an inventory before and after a busy shift. But if you're worried about waste, if you're worried about spillage, if you're trying to gauge waste and spillage, it's a great way to do it. The other thing that you can do is if you have different bartenders and you're worried about how they're performing, you can do this kind of quick inventory snapshot where you do your 5 bottles at the beginning of the shift, 5 bottles at the end of the shift, and then compare your actual to your theoretical. And you can do that with different bartenders. And then you'll understand, okay, hey, do I have a spillage issue or a waste issue among one bartender and not another? Then really what we do, so we do this audit on our pours, on our booze, on our inventory. That real quick is going to help tighten up that waste a bit. But just keeping those 4 types of waste in mind will do a lot, right? And again, we're talking overpouring, spillage and breakage, shrinkage and theft, and food spoilage. But let's give you an immediate implementation plan here that you can do that is going to help ensure that you're not wasting more than you should. Number 1, in your kitchen, use portion controls, right? I'm a big fan if you're using fries, if you're using tater tots, if you're using anything like that, you can't just reach in a bag, grab a handful, throw it in a fry basket. It's inconsistent. It's not costable. You will waste. Most people grab bigger handfuls than they should. That means you need to weigh that stuff, bag it, and then put it back in your freezer so that every time you're going to serve an order, you're just grabbing a bag. And that is just boom, done, boom, done, boom, done. Make sure your par levels are optimized, especially when we have these busier days, right? Some of this spoilage, as we talked about, is not necessarily coming from your employees screwing up. It's not causing from making a mistake. It's caused from too much prepping. So make sure your par levels are optimized and you have those dialed in for the amount of business that you actually expect. And don't set them at the beginning of the week and forget them. Dial them in as you go through your week. Make sure your staff has accountability systems if they waste things, if they break things, so that people are aware of it, you recognize it. Reward shifts that have low waste. I'm not saying punish people that have high waste, but what I am saying is make sure they're aware of it, call them out on it, and then work with them to help mitigate that waste or whatever situation caused the waste. And then again, your busiest Friday and Saturday, run that audit that we talked about, and that's really going to set you up for understanding how your business is flowing, what waste exists, and what is possible to cut. So what we did today, we talked about a complete view of waste, and this is important every month, right? We're framing it as December because December is a high volume month, especially when it comes to food for most bars. But do an audit like this, understand your waste, dig into your numbers, and make sure you are literally not losing money when you don't have to.
That about wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed today's insights, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you are ready to take your bar to the next level, schedule a strategy session with me by clicking the link in the show notes below. Until next time, have a great day, and we will talk again later.